oversensitivity has a lot to do with an under-nurtured gift. Like there is intuition there, and when we haven't figured out how to nurture it or step into it, it remains as oversensitivity. Certainly people feel impacted by being overly sensitive, and some of that impact can feel like, it's a symptom. It feels like if I walk into a room, I can absorb everything that's going on around me. If I'm having a conversation with somebody, I just take on all of their stuff and they walk away feeling great. Sometimes oversensitive can feel like, I can't be in loud places, or I can't be in overstimulation. And another symptom that I notice often with people is just picking up people's feelings, like really feeling the feelings that others might be feeling, or sometimes they're not feeling. Sometimes we feel the feelings of others who aren't feeling their feelings, but we end up feeling them. Sometimes just picking up so much energy around us has symptoms of anxiousness or symptoms of fatigue, needing to go to sleep, yawning, feeling energy drain out. Also, sometimes people will have body sensations, like they'll get rashes or they'll get headaches. So being overly sensitive certainly has impact, and people can really feel that as a big thing in their life. Some people may know that they feel overly sensitive, know that to be that they're empathic and they're picking up everything that's going on around them, certainly. And some people don't, not realizing that, I can't center myself amongst energy around me. So first, just to clarify, so we have sensitivity. Everybody's sensitive. Everybody's born a sentient being and can feel what's going on around them, and that's part of being a human being. And then there's overly sensitive. So overly sensitive happens when through our developmental years, we haven't exactly learned how to hold our center. And that has a lot to do with what our belief systems are, how we grew up in terms of how we're anchoring in ourselves. I grew up in a very loud Italian household. I had 7 brothers and sisters, and I was the oldest girl. And innately in me was a caregiver. I didn't know that at the time, and I didn't know I was a healer at the time. I just knew that I had a lot of responsibility at a very young age to caretake my family. I was really absorbing the responsibility of everybody's emotional needs, including my parents, and really just figuring out how to orient myself in this very loud, kind of chaotic family, and trying to find my little respites of reprieve or connection to myself. One of those was music, being able to go into playing the piano and getting connected to myself. What ended up happening was that by the time I was 9, I started to blow up. I started to gain a lot of weight. Now I know that as protection weight. I was trying to protect myself in a really challenging and emotional, very highly emotional environment. But all I knew it then is that I started to develop some belief systems about myself, about really just not being able to have myself. Not, who Wendy was for everybody else. If I could give to everybody else and take care of everybody else, then I'm a good person. So I didn't really develop this sense of me. And so eventually, over time, when I went off to middle school and high school, I was nannying for 21 families. I just recreated my childhood. I took care of kids and didn't have much of a social life through high school. And I reached college, and I was 19 years old. I had a nervous breakdown. I was completely overwhelmed energetically. I had to go to a hospital, and they put me on a medication at the time, which I took myself off because I realized I don't need the medication. I need someone to talk to me. I need to find my way back to myself. I need to figure out what this is that's going on. And so I had this incredible sort of divine intervention that happened. And I was in my college dorm at the time, and I was recovering from this nervous breakdown, and I had this calling from within to move to Colorado, and I'd never been to Colorado. So I was talking with my roommate at the time about what to do, and she said, I don't know, let's go take a walk and we can talk about it. So we start heading down. I was in Boston at the time, and we're heading down Massachusetts Avenue, and we take a left down Newberry Street. And back then there was a Tower Records on the corner, and I saw this man approaching me and my friend, and he was carrying a ukulele and he had a red jacket, and we were talking, and he said, can I sing you a song for some spare change? And I looked at him and I said, no, that's okay. And we were back in our conversation, and he said, no, Wendy, I think you need to hear a song. And at that point, he had my attention. I looked at him and I saw that he had a glow around his head this way. And he looked me in the eye, he said, Wendy, I'm gonna sing you a song, don't worry about the change. And he gets down on one knee and he sings this song, Home on the Range where the buffalo roam, one day you're gonna get to Colorado. And he says, it's not your time to go yet. And he gives me a kiss on the cheek and he vanishes. I stood there, I couldn't do anything. She runs up the street, jumps into Tower Records. She couldn't find him anywhere. She comes back, she goes, do you know what that was? And I said to her, I absolutely know what that was. And there was no doubt in my mind that it was an angel. And at that moment, all of my anxiety and my panic had vanished. I mean, it had resolved through my body. I was in complete peace. About 10 years later or more, I had written my first book, and my mom was in the audience, and I told that story, and she said, do you remember, I said to her, Mom, do you remember this? And she said, oh yeah, I remember. And I remember I got a book out in the library that was a Catholic book, I guess, a spiritual book about how to send angels to your kids if you can't be with them, or to people if you can't be with them. And she said, I picked out the angel Arius because I knew he could reach you through song. And that's what she remembered during that time. So this was a powerful experience that I had that set me on this path to start to develop my intuition. And what I know now is that oversensitivity has a lot to do with an under-nurtured gift. Like, there is intuition there, and when we haven't figured out how to nurture it or step into it, it remains as oversensitivity. So I'm going to explain this in a bit of a kind of an energetic level, a perspective. So when we come into this world, we're developing our root chakra essence, that's what I'll call it, which has everything to do with our tribe, our connection to our body, our family, and our belief systems that form at very, very early age, and definitely pre-verbal. So if I'm in an environment where I feel the powers of the root chakra, which are safety and trust and belonging and nurturing and grounded, I'm going to start developing a very strong sense of myself. Second chakra has to do with our emotional responsibility. So if I'm raised in that environment where my bonding is really healthy, people have very good emotional boundaries, I'm able to step into my creative, playful self, then I'm going to know what it feels like to be in my emotions. I'm going to feel centered in my emotions. And then as a result, when I move up to solar plexus development, and the solar plexus has to do with putting ourselves out there and being confident and manifesting our true self into the world and having that fire and taking action, I'm going to feel pretty good and confident about my boundaries, about being out there in the world and expanding. If, on the other hand, I've been in an environment where there was fear, where my emotional boundaries were crossed, if my physical boundaries were crossed, if there was sense of unsafety, if there was volatility or anything like that in the family unit, then my root chakra contracts. I go into a survival instinct, and the instinct is to protect. There is one primary cord that we need for our soul, for our self, and that's our grounding cord. And the grounding cord goes from the sides of the hips, the front of the low belly, and the low spine, so it sort of hugs around, and it extends down through the layers of the earth deep into the core. Ideally, the root chakra would be full and open, and we would feel grounded. But when that contraction happens, our soul actually lifts up in our body. It ungrounds, it disconnects from consciousness in the legs and in the grounding cord. What happens, and our body is amazing, our spiritual body, our intuitive body is amazing, it's going to compensate for a closure or overexposure of a power center. So one of the compensations is that the third chakra, and sometimes the second, will overexpose, will open up and start cording to everything around us. And that is to gain security. It's outer security, it's security in things around us. It's not necessarily the inner security that the grounding cord would give us, but that is what happens. So this is the crossroads between sensitive and overly sensitive. Ideally, we want to be grounded so that we can pull those cords back in so that we feel centered. If we're grounded in our body, the solar plexus can settle back down, our digestion can settle back down. And now there's another aspect of our boundaries, which is our auric field. And I want to explain this because a lot of times people will say, can I just put purple light around me or a field of light around me and be protected in the world if I'm overly sensitive? And I will say yes, and to a degree. It actually doesn't always work, and here's why. The auric field, the fullness of an auric field, has everything to do with how we feel inside. So if I'm not expanding, if I'm not stepping into my light, if I don't feel like I can own my boundaries and own my center and feel present and grounded inside myself, I'm not radiating. And when I'm not radiating, my energy ends up contracting or retreating inside ourselves. And when we retreat, we end up becoming a vacuum for negative energy. So if we can, the anecdote to that is that we actually are healing and stepping into these power centers in the body and radiating out so that the forming of our auric field comes from our expansion, from our central pillar and from our energy field that we're radiating out. So that's what creates the healthy aura and the outer boundaries, as opposed to just putting a light around us, which, it could work for a little bit, but if we're feeling withdrawn inside, the light on the outside isn't gonna, it's not gonna be a sustained tool.